Well, joining us from Doha now is Mohamad Elmasry. He's a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Really good to have you with us, Professor. How significant is Israel's behind-the-scenes role in shaping US thinking on when or whether or not to attack Iran?
Well, I think it's very important in many ways. The United States is doing what it's doing or threatening to do what it intends to do in Iran because of Israeli influence. We shouldn't forget the influence of Israeli politics and the Israeli lobby over American politics. This is something well documented in the literature. And in the present case, I mean, we don't have to look very far. We can just look at Israeli media reports. In some instances, you find Israeli officials sort of taking credit for what's happening. The heritage minister said in an interview a few days ago, this is in Channel 14, Israel, that Israel was behind the protests, that they have assets on the ground, and that came after Mike Pompeo's statement, the former U.S. Secretary of State, his statement that there are Israeli Mossad agents working on the ground to help sort of foment these protests. So we shouldn't underestimate the Israeli influence at all.
Yes, I want to ask you about Pompeo's statement in a moment, but Israeli officials reportedly favour letting internal pressure weaken the Iranian leadership further rather than immediate military action. How does that align with Israel's long-standing calls for confronting Iran?
I think it's consistent. I think what Israel wants ultimately is regime change and to destabilize and weaken Iran, and then to be able to install a leader that is sympathetic to Israel, that can do Israel's bidding for it. But what Israeli leadership is saying, what they're communicating, is that the Iranian leadership needs to be sort of sufficiently weakened. The state needs to be sufficiently weakened before a military strike is carried out. Otherwise, from the Israeli perspective, there's a risk that the regime would survive rather a military attack.
As you say, Professor, we've seen figures like the former US Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo openly encouraging protesters and even referencing Mossad involvement. To what extent do statements like that reinforce the Iranian leadership's narrative of foreign interference in the protests we're seeing?
Well, to a significant extent. I mean, look, the U.S. has a long history of aggression against Iran. I mean, one does not have to be a fan of the Iranian regime to point that out. I mean, it's obvious. It's well documented in the history. There's a history of regime change instigated by the United States, and so that context is important. And I think there's a real risk here that what the U.S. is doing could end up backfiring. The regime, the Iranian regime, has a lot of opposition inside of Iran, but not everybody who opposes the regime would like to see a violent assault on Iran carried out by the United States and Israel. And I think one of the reasons why the protests have dwindled in recent days is because there is a growing recognition inside Iran that there are, number one, people who are carrying out acts of organized violence. We've seen the videos. I mean, there's been violence on both sides, obviously, but also the fact that there is an Israeli element on the ground fomenting these protests. That's not to. I don't mean to paint all of the protesters with that same broad brush, but that is an element that is present. I think that there's growing recognition of that, and some people have been kind of turned off, and I think that's why they're staying at home over these last few days.
Okay, Professor Mohamad Elmasry, we'll have to leave it there. Great to get your analysis. Thank you again for joining us.